Hello and welcome back to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar. In this video I want us to talk about love. I want us to talk about love in particular through the ages. It's a prominent feature of the English Literature Specification for AQA A2, but in particular for Paper 1 you're commanded to answer love through the ages as a comparative response. And I'm giving you the breakdown of how I would approach the planning process for any potential question that could come up. And that's to help you cover every single base. Now this video is concentrating on the Great Gatsby in comparison to the pre-1900 collection of poetry in the anthology for AQA. But let's keep it really simple. I'm going to walk you through some steps and I'm going to give you some practical advice on ways you can approach the planning process and model for you an expanded, detailed plan. This is last minute revision in the sense that I'm hoping to equip you with the right vocabulary to respond really well and equip yourself with strong AO1 as well as hopefully being able to apply evidence you've already found. Now, let's get into it. First off, for love through the ages, we have to define love. It's an emotional connection that transcends time and involves the mind, the body and the soul. Now my suggestion as I go through these steps is, once I've read them all and shared them all with you, that you actively pause and have a go before you then watch on and see what I have for you. I then list synonyms of love, whether that's love as pain, love as distant, love as joy, and then as you've listed as many as you can, categorise your descriptions of love as either positive, negative, or, if it is, both. My suggestion then is that you generate as many synonyms of the original synonyms that you came up with. So if love is pain, I'd say love hurts, love is trauma, for example. These adjectives describe love even more, and actually they cover more potential bases of what could emerge as a question. And then I urge you to think and make broad connections to at least 2 and potentially 3 poems that offer a similar perspective to the view of each of the adjectives you've located. And then 2 moments from the Great Gatsby that show the same perspective or a contrasting perspective that links to the description of love that you found. Have a go at this. It sounds long-winded, but I will show it in action in a moment. Hit pause if you want to go for it. Now here's a few reminders that you need to remember to keep your mind at ease. We don't need to memorise evidence from the poetry anthology. It helps to have a few things at your fingertips, but you get the anthology in the exam. So just locating which poems correlate to the broad ideas and synonyms that you're using for love is enough. And really you only need 2 poems to link to the Great Gatsby. But learning 3 is useful, and I've found for students in my previous cohorts and in this one, the ones that are able to articulate with 3 poems their links to the Great Gatsby, they tend to be pushing a lot higher up towards the A star boundary. There's something about that level of confidence and assuredness that's much more sophisticated if you've got more than 2 poems, I suspect. Now, I'm saying here that learning a structure is a safety net for you in the exam, because the simpler your structure, the more chance you have of saying profound and impressive ideas. Whereas if you're kind of grappling with just trying to formulate your comparative topic sentence, you're probably not going to hustle as well as you should. And as ever, this is an analytical subject, so obviously the analysis rules still apply, as I'll share with you in a moment. So as promised, here are my broad parameters of what love is. For example, love is a memory, love is reckless, love is a sport, love is futile, love is egocentric, love is lust. Interesting, there's so many here. I've got 22 to be precise. And then I have a series of synonyms that help me broadly think of other connections that come from the word linked to love. Now, the joy of having all this here is that it's easy to then make connections to the poems, and I'll show you how that works in a moment. But I'd just like to clarify that year on year, this part of the exam is about you being able to connect what the examiner is asking you to write about, or what the statement is about, to something you have a connection to. So it's actually quite powerful and quite helpful if you can now separate, which poems link to that theme of love as, let's say, a memory. And so I've done that work for you to simplify the process of you then sourcing your evidence. Hit pause if you want to make notes, or actually if you just want to get your head around the kinds of synonyms I've chosen that I think could be useful for an exam question. More than anything, this is about vocabulary. The more synonyms you have at your fingertips, the less likely you are to repeat yourself at the start of each comparative topic sentence, which in my mind is a great way of signalling to your examiner that you know more than just the word or vocabulary they've shared with you in the question. Okay, so that's the raw stuff with the vocabulary there that's relatively simple, but offers a few opportunities for you to broaden out from the topic of what love is. And now you have my broad parameters of the poems that I think match to that theme of love, as I say, memory, as reckless, as sport, etc. My suggestion is that you review the poems in red as tip-top, awesome, quick links to these themes. But by all means, we haven't sorted these themes of love yet. And that's actually of huge importance for us to simplify the process of how we carry these themes of what love through the ages is between both the poetry and the Great Gatsby. Hit pause, and I'd suggest that you keep your anthology open and have a flick through to see the evidence that might be of relevance here. So having done this, we're now ready to break it down into the themes that are positive, and these are the ones that I think truly are. Love as admiration, as true, as nostalgia, as constant, and as liberation. Now, all of this is debatable. You might have totally different views about whether any of these are positive or not. But because this is a subject that's rooted in interpretation, think back to those themes and synonyms I've given you for love and decide whether they offer you scope to see love as positive or not. Next up, we've got those that I consider to be both positive or negative. So for example, love as a memory. Memory can be brilliant, like nostalgia, but they can also be traumatic, which is much more negative. Liberation sounds great, it's freedom, but too much freedom is in a way as if the love is compounded with indifference. Love as wealth, an interesting concept that I'll come back to later in this video. Maybe it's because it's a prized possession, it's a valued thing, but equally, if we're obsessed with wealth and pursue it with a love that's like avarice, that's negative. Passion is obviously a beautiful idea, and it's at the opening stages of relationships that we care about passion, perhaps. But if it seeps into solely being for physical pleasure of its own accord with nothing more, and it's just lust, well, that seems negative to me. Then unrequited love. Now, it might seem positive from a distant kind of troubadour style of wooing in some parts of how we view love in more distant, like Renaissance times. But it's also negative because someone likes you but you don't like them back. That sounds sad. Love as a mystery. Well, the very nature of a mystery is that it's shrouded in things we don't fully understand. A mystery can be beguiling and fascinating, but it can also be a way of locking us out from understanding the truth. Now, I seem like a bit of a negative thinker here, because the range of emotions for love as something negative are much more easily accessible for us, or at least they were for me when planning this curriculum for The Great Gatsby and the poems. So love as reckless, love as a sport, love as futile, so hopeless, love as egocentric, love as lust, love as obsession, love as restriction, love as pain, love as distant, love as destruction, possession, superficial and traumatic. I suppose my advice to you as people and critics moving forward with this exam, formulate the idea that, broadly speaking, you're given a choice of statement that you're responding to, but there are many more woven tapestries to formulate your response from that are steeped in negativity than there are in positivity. And it doesn't really matter which side of the camp you focus on, as long as your evidence answers the given statement. So having so many synonyms at your fingertips offers you that opportunity. So let's talk essay structure. Once we've defined what love is, and in particular identified what the key word of the statement about love is, we then need to have found and searched our mind for the synonyms that link to the phrasing of the question. Now, if the statement is particularly wordy, as you'll find in my next kind of slide, I would urge you to translate the statement into your own words. Make it so basic that you're not overwhelmed by it. And then here's my basic analysis of how I would break down the structure of my response. Okay, so same things as ever, a comparative topic sentence, just with a comparative connective at the top. I'd then use my evidence on either a poem or The Great Gatsby. I then move into using that evidence into close language analysis. And as ever, 4 parts to my language analysis. I'm going to either identify a device, or identify a feature of the structure of that moment in the poem and how it fits in, or the novella. I'll then consider the word class of the evidence I'm sharing, potential reader reactions, the writer or the poet's intentions. I'm going to link it to love through the ages, maybe the historical time period it fits into. Maybe I'll link it to a critic or an interpretation I have of why the poet or the writer chose to link it. And if I've concentrated on Gatsby first, let's say, I'll then move on to commenting on the poem. But if I've concentrated on the poem first, I'll do the opposite and concentrate on Gatsby next. But that's broadly what I'll do at least 2 times. This is quite intensive work, but the more rigorous you are in your thinking, it's so much more freeing for you in the quality of response that you'll be crafting. The examiner's report for 2018 acknowledged this, and whilst I'm not endorsed by AQA, I do know for certain that simplicity to your structure is exactly what you need to ensure that you are clear in every sense. So let's try this process out with an essay title. Love is richer with an abundance of treasure. So here, I've decided I need to translate the statement. I'm being asked to examine the statement in the sort of true form of the exam question. If I'm translating this statement, the thing that it resonates most with on my spectrum of love is that love is wealth. And so the synonyms I've got in my head, just as a recall, are about love as abundance, as a prize, as about affluence, maybe material wealth, and that seems both positive and negative. And now I'm thinking about how I'd formulate my topic sentences. And my 3 broad topic sentences for comparison would be that love is defined by wealth. Love is an obsession with wealth. And maybe that wealth is even an antidote for a broken heart, as we find anyway with Gatsby. This for now is my starting point. But then I'd actually spend maybe 10-15 minutes in the exam before I even pick up my pen to begin my essay, searching for the evidence. I'm going to share with you now the evidence I would pull up for those 3 broad topic sentences. Therefore, you've got a chance to then use this structure and write your own response. So, love is defined by status or wealth. And in brackets I've got for the statements that are evidence from The Great Gatsby, their chapter. I want you to just take a moment to read this evidence and see for yourself that I've chosen 2 moments from The Great Gatsby that show status and wealth as defining the relationship. To young Gats, the yacht represented all the beauty and glamour in the world. I'd think about the semantic field of kind of the aesthetics of beauty and glamour, and the kind of wow factor that is defined by this object, this material wealth. And equally, it excited him that many men had already loved Daisy. that increased her value in his eyes. We've got this kind of jargonistic use of the financial term value. Too many men, all the more status is defined, and it excited him. There's an emotional connection to status. By contrast, the scrutiny by Richard Lovelace is playful and quite brutal in its laddish humour, with the simile like skillful mineralists that sound for treasure in unploughed up ground. It's quite a crude image of sexual pursuit of virgins, and the skillful mineralist, you know, they're defined by searching for unploughed up treasure. And then the Ruined Maid tells a very different story of opposites, if you like, with the lowly farmer or peasant, if you like, looking down on the prostitute. But the semantic field of riches bombards that poem by Hardy. And oh, didn't you know I've been ruined, said she. That cadence of the repetition that she's been ruined, yet she seems so much more wealthy, seems definitive, almost a chorus of how love is in operation. Now, I'm going to keep going through with how I would define the evidence. But remember, it needs to be stripped back. It doesn't need to be loads of points and loads of evidence. I've got 3 main points for my essay, and I've just chosen 2 bits of evidence from each text that I'm referencing. And to me, the poems act as one reference point, even though I'm commenting on 2 separate poems. I'm only using 1 piece of evidence. I'm going to keep ploughing through it. So, love as obsession with wealth. So Fitzgerald delineates Daisy by her associations with wealth, with excitement, with romance. It's Daisy's voice. It's full of money, we're told, that fills the novella. It's like a thrilling voice of promise and possibility. Arguably, it doesn't deliver. But Gatsby was overwhelmingly aware of the youth and mystery that wealth preserves. In chapter 8, that comment is very telling. It's now this pursuit of wealth that's got him so far that means that it preserves his intensity of how it's going to help him maintain his mystery and his belief in youth. Now, in contrast, the flea, yet this enjoys before it woo and pampered swells with one blood made of 2. The obsession with wealth here is that, oh, that lucky flea gets to suck your blood, yet I can't even kiss you. What's that about? Remember, that phrase repeated, it's got a euphemistic tone. It's almost obsessional in the idea that, you know, they're going to preserve the wealth of love they share for the person they're writing the poem for. Because even if they're forgotten, in spite of that legacy, they dare to hope that their lover will remember them. And it's that imperative mood that seems quite obsessional with love as a wealthy concept. Now, obviously, I wouldn't need more than 2 pieces of evidence, but by all means take a gander at what I've said for the Ruined Maid in my shorthand, and also for Who So List to Hunt. It's as simple as pulling up the allusions in each text and making them operate in a way that you're comfortable with in your analysis. Now, the final point I'm making, I think, resonates a little bit further with The Great Gatsby, but it makes sense to pull that to your attention. So the notion here of wealth as the cure for a broken heart is what is occupying the last section of the essay plan. And it's interesting that Fitzgerald, as a critic of his time, wrote about the jazz age with the Wall Street crash that followed as what he saw as the most expensive orgy in history over. I think that's a really useful critical quotation that you could use in most of your essays comparing Gatsby to the pre-1900 poetry. Now, in essence, all the evidence I have here could be applied to Gatsby's broken heart, and then you can fulfill the requirements of the poetry by thinking of where the poetic voice seems to have a broken heart and where wealth cures them somehow. I saw him opening a chest of rubies to ease the gnawings of his broken heart. Now, that kind of a comment about the elusive Gatsby is fascinating because it offers us an insight into the mystery of him and the way that others procure the idea that he is managing his broken heart with things and objects, material possessions. And his line to Tom, "She only married you because I was poor," That's his way of narrating the reality that he is not married to Daisy. He only wishes it could be so. Now, in terms of the poems themselves, my preference would be to Non Sum Qualis as a fin de siècle kind of decadent poem, when he says, I've not been faithful to the sinner in my fashion. The in my fashion part is so interesting, because really in my fashion is a code way of saying, I have been cheating on you in my own way. To me, that is faithful, but I've been unfaithful. An interesting irony. And that repetition and the cadence of that chorus constantly repeated across the poem is quite impulsive and decadent in its tone. But equally, we get the power in the Garden of Love, as I've referenced in lines 7 and 8, with the wealth and the peace of nature that the romantic, poetic movement was so preoccupied with. So I turn to the Garden of Love that so many sweet flowers bore. That's a nice contrast. It's not wealth, it's the love of natural beauty that is a solace to this poetic voice who's been broken by the brutality of institution. Now, what I hope this video has offered you is some top tips on how to approach the planning process and a vocabulary to support you with your AO1, because clarity is the big thing that examiners took issue with in previous years. It's the idea that students don't know how to explain and expand on the statement that's given. Best of luck, and I hope this helps you with great academic success. Why not subscribe to Miss Hannah Loves Grammar for all things English, literary and grammatical?